Meow, and welcome to Banned Books Conversations, where radical readers discuss prohibited prose. I'm your host, Tonya Todd, and we're here to talk about banned books, literary works that have been removed from a library shelf or school curriculum. Over the course of Banned Books Week, this series will cover 7 different books, the reasons they were banned, and the value in reading them. Today's book is 19 Minutes by Jodi Picoult. I should warn listeners there will be spoilers ahead, but before we get to that, let's meet today's radical readers. Heather, please introduce yourself. Tell us a bit about what you do.
Hi, my name is Heather. I am the co-founder of So She Slays, which is a women's empowerment platform. We have a really nice social following, an editorial site, and 2 podcasts of our own.
And Lisa?
I'm Lisa Rayne. I write action adventure and contemporary historical romance. I'm also a certified English language arts teacher for high school who taught language arts for 6 years in between my stint as a lawyer and as a published author. So literature kind of in my sweet spot.
And Gregory?
Hi, I'm Gregory Kompes. I'm an author and teacher of writing. I currently teach at SNHU in their MFA program, which I helped them design when it first started. So I'm very proud of that work. And I also run the writer workshop, doing small workshop groups to offer feedback and education for writers.
So, Lisa, we'll start with you on this. I'm curious, what is it about the banned books conversation that interests you? You said you're a lawyer, you're a teacher, you're a writer.
I'm also a childhood book geek, basically. I was that kid who'd rather be in my room reading a book than outside with everybody else. And books for me, someone who grew up in a single parent household, were a way for me to get to know more of the world that I wouldn't get to see in person. It was a way to travel. It was a way to get to know more people. It was exciting for me. And the notion that someone is going to tell me what I could and could not access at a public library or at my school would have really just pissed me off, to be honest. It's one thing for you to decide you don't want to read that book or it's not the book for you. It's another thing to tell other people that they can't read the book. Don't like being told what to do. And I don't think anyone really should have that power over someone else. Just don't pick up the book.
Do you feel comfortable sharing your shirt with us?
I was telling her, like, okay, let me get my microphone out of the way. Ban bigots, not books.
Love it. And what about you, Heather? What brings you to this conversation?
Um, I think, I mean, much like you said, Lisa, I was never as big of an advocate of reading growing up because I always had reading comprehension problems. And so I always had to go to like special tutoring in order to like learn how to read and really understand it. But once I got the knowledge of like it was playing a movie in my head, I couldn't like stop
Mm.
it. So after I learned that that was the trick for me to remember the story, I started picking up all sorts of different books and just haven't really stopped since.
Gregory?
Um, well, the banned book thing it really hits home for me. As a gay queer author, but as just a gay queer person, growing up, I never saw myself on the pages of books ever. I did not get to read any books when I was a kid that had people like me. Nothing, not a single one. Not until I was in my 20s did I
Mm.
finally discover gay literature. And even though I don't think they were officially banned from our school library or from our local library, they just weren't stocked. There was sort of this silent policy. So I write books with queer characters who are just queer. Like they're not there to make a statement; they just are. They're just living their lives on the pages of my stories, and so it infuriates me when people like me, young people like I was don't have an opportunity to see themselves on the pages. And we were making great strides until very recently. But there was an announcement today. They're pulling all the LGBTQ plus literature from the Florida schools, all of it. Every single book is coming out. It's infuriating to me. So whenever I have an opportunity, I raise my voice. I speak, I talk, and I live very out. My husband and I have been together for 23 years, and every once in a while you get that your partner or no, he's my husband, right? I use the words because people need to hear the words, and we need to see ourselves in the world that we live in. So I'm very passionate, I guess, about that, and as a teacher of writing too, encouraging voices to write their truth, write their story, have their experience as writers as well. It's so important.
And I remember when you were president of Henderson Writers Group that anti-censorship was also a passion of yours.
That's where I started. The very first meeting I took over, I announced that's where we were going, and we could talk about it. I was happy to talk about it, but I wasn't going to allow anybody to make a writer feel uncomfortable because of what they were writing. And we lost some members over that, but that was the journey. And I was elected, so they knew me, and then the group started to really flourish with the people who stuck around, and then we added a lot. So it's
some came back. Some came back.
Yeah. I'm just not I'm an anti-censorship in any form person.
So on that note, I want to stick with you, Gregory, and look at the other side of this. Have you ever had an experience with a book that offended you? And if so, how did that affect you?
I've had lots of books that I find offensive, lots of them, that I don't like the content, that bother me. The Bible, for example, really bothers me. It's fine that it's there. I think it's an interesting piece of literature and history, but it's not my cup of tea. You know what I mean? I have complained at a few hotels that I've walked into where there's still a Gideon Bible. And I've taken it down to the desk and just said, I don't want this anywhere near me. It's offensive. But at the same time, I would never say ban a book because I don't like it, ever. I try to read things that bother me anyway. I try to encourage people to read banned books. It's the same thing. I want to see how the world works, right? So I read literature that comes up on lists and that sounds interesting and that people are talking about, so I'm well informed. I try not to read too much in a bubble, although I do lean a little left, so I do tend to read a little bit to the left. But that's that's who I am. But no, I just don't think any book should ever be banned for any reason.
And I
people
think
should
it's
make
important to note that the Bible is one of the most banned books in history.
Right, exactly. And Lisa made the comment about if you don't like the book, don't pick it up. Mine is, if you don't like the book, just put it down. You don't have to read it. And that's okay. You can make a choice, right? Mm-hmm. Especially we live in a capitalist society. We make choice all the time where we spend our money, all of those things, right? That's how we operate. So pick it up. If you don't like it, put it down, but don't keep others from picking it up, right? We all have the right to pick up whatever book we want to. Yeah.
What about you, Heather? Have you had an experience with a book that offended you?
Well, much like Gregory, I grew up in a very religious, dynamic environment, meaning, my mom is Mormon, my dad is Taoist. I grew up down the street from a Sikh temple and I went to a Lutheran private school. So I was all over the map when it came to religion. So the Bible is probably one that I don't give it much weight. I understand intention, sure, okay. You're giving guidelines, but yes, definitely, Gregory. I agree with Gregory. I also just finished another book, The Power. It was turned into a Hulu series, and it's very encapsulating of what is happening right now, and it's as if women were to get back, or were to be the only ones with this certain type of power, and what the world does in reaction to that. Like, in societies and cultures and how people are hunted, but then how some women turn feral and like end up, doing the same things that were done to them, but like to men. And it's so crazy. But at the end of that book, I don't want to spoil it in case anybody wants to read it, but highly recommend it. But I was angry at the end of that book. I was not happy. And I definitely closed it and threw it on my bed and I was like, done with that. So it's a whole emotion right there.
So offensive, but still worth reading.
It was offensive, but yes, absolutely worth reading. And I would say only because if this were to actually happen, it's insane to see the shoe on the other foot. Yeah, it's a really good perspective piece. So I would definitely recommend it. It's called The Power.
Lisa.
So it sounds like she's saying it was offensive, but thought-provoking.
Yes.
Yes, it was absolutely both.
And there's something about that thought-provoking aspect of things. And I will say, funny, being a comparative literature major and a English teacher, that a lot of the classics I actually find offensive. And when we had to pick classic literature for our class to read, there were certain books that had been taught for years before I showed up on the scene that I refused to teach. And there are names you've heard of, Mice and Men. And, I had several teachers who loved teaching, but I'm like, I'm not going near that book with a 10-foot. But why? I said, because I don't want to deal with the white savior and the glossing over of racism and the right. And I also have a certificate in African American studies and taught African American history. So there's things I understand about that history timeline that people who simply studied those books in high school, it's a perspective they don't have because they weren't taught it. And they don't know the history. And if they're in places like Florida where they think AP, right, African American studies is made up history, right, they don't understand the background. And for me, this notion that there was anything redemptive, right, about slavery or anything redemptive about whites thinking they saved people during Jim Crow and a racist society, I find offensive. Do I think people need to stop reading the book? No. If you're going to read it and have a conversation with me, we can have that conversation. That doesn't mean I need to teach the book. It just means we can have a conversation about the issues and I can explain to you why I won't teach the book, right? But would I ban it? No, because I think for some people it may be thought provoking. What if somebody picks that book up and that's the book that angers them so much they start to go research more about that period? There's a benefit in that. There's a benefit to people getting upset about literature because it often makes them go face something that's real in the world.
Mm. Excellent.
I was just at the Authors Guild conference this past weekend, the WIT conference up in Lenox, Mass, which was a very nice event. And what was so interesting at during one of the panel discussions, it was all Q&A, people being interviewed and things. It was all panels. And one of the things that was interesting that came up was the discussion of Huckleberry Finn. And there was a woman on the panel who took the same stance. I won't teach Huckleberry Finn, a white woman, actually. And the woman of color who was on the panel said, but the best thing you could do is teach Huckleberry Finn and have an honest conversation about how Jim is treated, right? Of how he was treated in that time period and what the expectations were and how he was abandoned at the end of the novel and how at the time that was okay, but now it's cause for a discussion. It isn't about banning the book. It should be about having a conversation about what's in the book, right? And how times have changed and how our values have changed. So it's a very good approach, right? It isn't about banning. It's about opening up the conversation and being honest, right? Being honest about what's on the pages.
Well, Heather, we'll start with you this time. Is there a scenario in which you feel banning a book is the correct course of action?
I want to say my initial instinct is no, just because it opens the door to such, I mean, a slippery slope. It really does. And I feel like, of course, there are books out there that I disagree with and that I absolutely cannot stand. But I mean, I feel like it's up to everybody else to decide, whether they want to pick up or put down a book or, educate themselves on certain things. I feel like you should have that choice, and that choice shouldn't be taken from you.
How about you, Lisa?
That's a hard one for me. I think there are books that are based off of lies and misinformation that it probably would be best if they weren't published. But then where do you draw the line, right? Because there's going to be something that I love or I think should be told or I think should be in a book. Then if someone uses that exact same argument to ban that book I think is worthwhile, then are we just substituting someone's opinion for someone else's?
Mhm.
I think there are some books that probably do more harm than good. But I'm going to go to a movie here, and it's because I'm a movie, but there's a movie called The American President. That's one of my all-time favorite movies. And there's a section in there where he talks about America being advanced citizenship, where you have to allow someone to stand up and shout at the top of their lungs something you disagree with for the right to be able to do the same thing, right? And I kind of look at that as where we're at in banning books. If you want to write it and publish it, that's fine. I have a right to not like it. I have a right to petition against it. I have a right to go on a campaign that says it's lies and misinformation. But I shouldn't ban that book unless I'm ready to let you ban one that I love, right? And I'm not ready to go there.
How about you, Gregory?
No, I don't
Kinda
think
knew that
there's
would
ever a reason to ban a book. Just that simple. Yeah, I mean, I embrace the First Amendment. I think we all have a right to write our opinions, write our ideas, write our stories the way we want to. It's in the Constitution, and thankfully it's there. So no, I don't think banning a book is the way. I think I'm right with Lisa, the idea that if I don't like something, I can write a bad review, I can talk about it, I can do other things or not. Right? I mean, yeah, I don't believe in banning books ever.
So we've talked a little bit about the slippery slope already. Lisa, how does that concept fit in with the desire to ban books?
Kind of what I was just saying is like once you start, then you have to decide how far that goes. And more likely than not, it's going to go further than you want it to go and then turn around and bite you in the bottom. And that slippery slope concept also comes from laws. Like when we pass laws and make decisions, like we can't let something go too far because then how far do we really want to let it go when it gets to this instance or the next instance or the next instance? So once you start banning books, once you start banning curriculum, once you start banning anything, it's easier to ban the next thing. And, Gregory already brought up Florida, right? They started with one thing, now they're going for the next thing, now they're pulling the next, like they're going to keep going because once they get the first thing, how far they can go and how fast they can get there, it increases over time.
What are your thoughts, Heather?
No, I completely agree. It there's no stopping it. I mean, when you're giving yourself permission, and once you give yourself permission, what's to stop you from banning or doing anything else that doesn't align with who you are or your business or your political views or whatever it may be? There's no stopping it. Once you allow that to happen, you're done. That it's like an all or nothing type of thing for me. As soon as you say okay, there you go. I mean, you're it. That's it.
Gregory.
Yeah, I don't know. I live in Georgia, so I live in a state that's actually passing almost all the same laws Florida has passed. They're just doing it very quietly, and there's no press. Teachers here are not allowed to say the word gay. They're literally not allowed to say the word gay in the classroom. Not allowed. They can lose their jobs if they use certain words. Things are in an extreme place. There was a guest author recently that did make the paper. It made the national news and then it got picked up locally. It wasn't covered locally first, but a guest speaker came in, and I can't remember all the names, but he was talking about an artist who was gay who did comic books. Tonya will laugh because that's why I don't know who all the names are because I'm not a comic book reader like she is. But he was here and he was promoting a book that he co-created with somebody else and they were asking about a character, and because the creator, the artist, was gay, he created these gay characters in this book, and they sent out an apology to the parents of the students who were in the assembly that the word gay was used and an artist was referenced as gay within a discussion, and they did not know that that was going to be said. And they reprimanded the man who said it and said he cannot be invited back into any of the schools in Georgia. I mean, that's how extreme things are, right? So, and they're banning books just like Florida, and they're pulling books off shelves just like Florida and Texas. So, these things just keep happening and happening and happening, and there's only so much you can protest, right? I mean, we have day jobs too, right? We have things we have to do, but there's only so much you can protest, and it's everywhere, and it's overwhelming, and it's this huge, it's a beyond slippery slope. I mean, we're in an avalanche position in the South with what's going on with the rule of law, and the idea of not just banning books, but like I said, banning language, censoring language in the classroom, and threatening people's jobs with people who act out against it, or try to be rebel or whatever. So I think we're beyond slippery slope in some parts of the country. I mean, that mountain's coming. It's coming down on us. It just is, and it's overwhelming. It's terribly overwhelming. So I have to admit, it was nice to be up in the Northeast for the weekend and be surrounded by the liberal intelligentsia. I forgot they existed. It's been so long since I lived in New York, and it was nice to get a little bit of that energy where they said some things on stage, and I sort of looked around waiting for a reaction. Went, oh wait, these are my people. This is a safe space to talk about the liberal ideal. So anyway, I think we're beyond the slippery slope. It's gone. The mountain is coming down. I'm coming down on us right now.
You said something interesting, which is that it's being done quietly there. And I think it may even be more dangerous. I mean, the reason it's quiet is because there's no one announcing it so that they're patting themselves on the back because they want to run for president. But it's more dangerous if it's quiet, because then people don't know to act against it. They don't know to
Right.
protect themselves.
Right, exactly. Until it's already law. I mean,
Right.
all of these Republican leadership groups in the southern states they just pass and pass and pass these bills now, and they've taken, it isn't just Florida, because it's happening all over the country in a lot of Republican states with Republican governors. This is the agenda, right? And it's being played out now because there is momentum. It is what people are doing, and if they could do it in Florida, we can do it here too. I mean, I think that's part of what this is all about.
So speaking of that agenda, in recent years, there's been a pattern in the themes of books that get banned. Heather, what do you think this pattern says about where we are as a society?
Now we're going backwards. I have never been in such a position to witness just how drastically things can move backwards. It is astounding. I mean, Jeffrey, just to hear about what's happening in Atlanta. Like I'm in LA, I'm in California. So we're way on the other spectrum of this. And just to hear about it, like I didn't even know that was happening down there. And I mean, I guess the theme of the banned books is just anything that doesn't agree with me. Anything that I don't want, anybody else to know, which is scary considering the lack of information that you're then giving to our youth in order to learn and make decisions on their own, in order to have understanding. Now and this is the thing, it's like, I understand where they're coming from. I don't agree. I mean, I grew up in the country in Northern California. There's definitely not a lot of liberal people up there. But I understand their train of thought, but I also understand just how small their world is. Now, not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing or anything like that, because some people choose that and they like it, and that's fine. But it really, when you start banning books and you start taking points of view in stories, you take opportunities of understanding away from people. You take opportunities of growth. And then you start wondering, well, why are you doing that?
What are your thoughts on this, Gregory?
Well, one of the words the right has been using over the past 2 or 3 years, it's been really forward. I'm sure it goes back further than that, but it's been very forward. Is the word indoctrination, that they're fearful that their kid might read a gay book and become indoctrinated into queer life. And of course, it's exactly the opposite. What they're doing is indoctrinating their own children into their narrow belief system, and making sure they won't be exposed to anything else in the world that might have them question that authority and those ideas and the beliefs. And, and so it's that word so much of when they point fingers out in their media blitzes, it really is they're talking about themselves and what they're trying to do with the people around them. So it's silencing ideas to maintain that narrow-minded, small world view. I mean, it's they say they're fighting indoctrination, but what they're doing is maintaining their own level of indoctrination.
Lisa, I'm guessing you have thoughts on this.
Yeah, I agree. I will also say that other than the recent attacks on codified law, that a lot of this behavior is not recent. It's been around a long time. It just wasn't talked about as much. And we're in this society where, with the types of social media and video and how quickly news can travel now on the internet and so forth, we're hearing about it more often. And people who are opposed to it are going, look what they're doing, look what they're doing, look what they're doing. And people who think they're doing good and probably running for office, right, are going, look what I'm doing, look what I'm doing, look what I'm doing. It's been done before. What's new is trying to find ways to codify the racism or codify their way of preserving their indoctrination of their children and their community, and to lash out and pretend that learning history is indoctrination. These are facts. They're not going anywhere. So teaching them is a threat to them, because we often hear those expressions, right? Like, knowledge is power. Well, no, knowledge is power when you do something about it. And what happened is Blacks got a voice. Gay people got a voice. They started showing up on television. They started showing up in shows. They started getting books published. And they were like, well, we wanted to give them an opportunity. We didn't want to give them that much opportunity. So now they're like, whoa, wait a minute. This is not what we meant. We got to back this up. And I think that's really what's happening. It's like, oh, we don't need them to get that much equity, right? And one way to do that is to stop the flow of information. And that's why book banning and curriculum banning and changing what you can get at the public library is so at the forefront of this movement.
So, Gregory, you're a teacher. Tell us the value in reading books that may be considered offensive by some.
Well, it's this whole conversation, right? It really is about expanding your mind. It is about learning about how other people live, and what's at stake in the world, and having an opportunity to see yourself on the page, having an opportunity to see other people on the page. I've learned so much about lots of different cultures and ethnicities, lots of parts of the world that I would have never been able to visit. You know what I mean? So it opens up ideas and conversation and dialogue, and I think we're right in the core of it here, right? It's that idea of when your mind expands, you begin challenging ideas, and when you challenge the ideas you were raised with, you break them down and move forward in the world in a different way. I agree totally with Lisa. This is not new. This is old. Our country has been doing it before it was a country. This has been going on for hundreds of years, right? The idea of keeping people out of power, keeping power away from people. And the pendulum swung very far and very fast with Obama as president. And this is that extreme response to that. Like, whoa, we got to slow this way down, way the fuck down. We got to slow it down, because we can't have all these people have rights. And I think there's also those numbers of whether, within another 25 to 30 years, America will no longer be a white dominant society. And that has the white people scared to death that they're going to be treated the way they've treated everybody else. I mean, I think the book Heather brought up, The Power, is exactly right. I mean, they're scared of that because they've treated
Mhm.
the whole world pretty terribly. So if the white people are going to get it, right, and I'm an old white guy, you know, I have the gay moniker, but I'm still an old white guy, right? But there's so much fear of that. So I think the idea of the liberal education and why the word liberal and woke, why those words are so horrific now to the right, is because when you read, you expand your mind and you ask questions and you challenge the authority that exists, and that's a problem for a lot of people in power right now, to be questioned. I'm a big fan of reading and a big fan of helping people read. And I taught at Nevada State College. I taught English comp, and so I used to have some ask questions and survey my students. And one of the things I've been noticing is fewer and fewer high school students actually have to read complete books. It's just not part of the curriculum anymore. You know, and I don't care what the book is, but kids should be reading books, because if you read books, then you're more likely to read books in the future. You become a reader. But if you're never asked to actually read any long form fiction, then you don't have the capacity to read long form fiction, and therefore bring in bigger ideas and broader ideas and thoughtful moments. And we talk about, educators talk about the fact that kids no longer have the attention span because of media and social media and the phone and whatever. But that's not the reason. They're just not being asked and trained to do the job of reading long form fiction. You don't see it books anywhere hardly anymore in school. So all of that stuff is connected, right? We all read books. Well, I'm older than many of you, but we all read books growing up. We had to, whether we liked them or not, right? We were tested on it. So there were discussions. We would read books over whole semesters and have discussions for whole semesters, and right, and there isn't very much of that happening now. So we're not teaching our young people to be readers.
So Heather and I look shocked right now. Lisa, you
know.
look surprised.
No, because high school language arts teacher, and I'm a reader. And I know the best way to teach kids to read, or to get kids to read, or to increase comprehension and increase writing skills, is to read. So I implemented sustained silent reading at the beginning of my classes. And when I first got there, teachers were horrified. You know, the administration is not going to let that go. And I would have administrators walk in and they're giving me advice. Like, you can't just have kids sitting there reading. That's the most important thing they can do. And I would have to justify it. And unfortunately for them, trained lawyer, right? I could justify it. And so they were like, well, okay, carry on, right? And slowly other people picked it up. But the thing is, when it comes to, you know, what Gregory was talking about, when I was young, I'm older than I look, but right, we would have that book. And actually, I went to a private girls' school, so we had to read several books in a semester. And you talked about it in class, and you had to do an analysis paper, and you had to understand the themes and the issues and the care. And they limit the books you can teach as whole class reading. There's actually a list of approved and disapproved books that are approved and disapproved pretty much by an administration or a school board, most of whom have not actually read the books. So I'm like, how do you make this? You haven't read the books. How can you make this decision? And the thought that kids don't have time to read an entire book. They need to be doing something more important. It's the most backwards approach to education I can think of, because the most important thing they can be doing at school is reading and analyzing what they read. And he's right. And it's changing. It's getting harder and harder for teachers to have kids sit and read a book, or to assign an entire book as part of course curriculum.
Heather, what are your
Shook
thoughts
right
here?
now. I am just shook. I don't. What? I mean, I don't even know where to start in that entire spiel. We just had. I mean, where do we go from there? Like, if teachers can't, I mean, I grew up having to, chapter by chapter, every night. That was part of my language arts. We would come in, I would have to write a book report. I would have to, pick a side, quote unquote, and then defend my side. I mean, that's like one of the things. I mean, I was definitely a language arts kid in school. I was horrible at math and biology and all the other things, but language arts was my jam. And so to hear this, I mean, I'm a big writer. I love writing. I've kept a journal since I was like 8 years old. So it's developed over time, and being able to tell stories, being able to even just verbally verbally communicate and have an argument and defend your stance. That all comes from reading that all comes from communication. And to say that kids don't have time anymore, if they can sit on the phone and scroll through, Snapchat and Instagram and TikTok, they have plenty of freaking time. This is my thing, is they have too much time. Too much time. Like,
Mhm.
give them some freaking books to read so they can educate them. I cannot. Y'all got me fired up right now.
Good, good. Yeah,
Yes.
there's all kinds of these things that are happening in education that the general public just isn't aware of. But the truth is, and Lisa knows this better than me because she lived K through 12. I got out. I was like, oh, I can't do this for a living. I can't be told what to do like this. But the idea of where do we go from here? But it's as easy as a new curriculum being thrown at the teachers, which they throw new curriculum at teachers all the time. And within a few grades, it's a whole different experience, right? We think it's this big, longer thing, but in a lot of ways, it's not. You can change third grade or fifth grade or eighth grade curriculum within a season or two, right? Of people having a determination that we're going to change the curriculum. So it's so doable, right? And it's how things got the way they are, right? School boards decided kids aren't reading these books anymore,
Mhm.
right? So people who are more liberal and more interested in education in that way, being elected to school boards, that's how things change. That's how things have changed throughout the decades, right? So I mean, this can be flipped pretty easily, so long as there's a desire, right, an interest and momentum. I really believe that. I don't think it's the end of the world. Lord knows this is not nearly as bad as things have been in this country. So at any given time, right? So things can change. It isn't all doom, right?
Mhm.
There's hope. There's always hope because it does change faster than we give it credit for, or it can. It can, right?
And we're here, we're fighting, we're doing the work.
Yeah, but I think all these presidential initiatives, No Child Left Behind, which was terrible for education, right, really shifted things. But a president with the right motivation can come in and do something very similar and get a few laws passed and change the entire set of goals for the education system in the United States. Right? It really just takes a leader. It really just takes a leader with an agenda who says enough. It's time to do something different. You know.
You putting your name out there, Gregory for president?
I am not. I'm not running for office. Not doing it. Not going on a school board. I don't. I have other things I need to do.
Famous
But
last words.
well, but no. But I think engaged parents are the people to do it, right? If you've got a first grader or a second grader, and you don't like how things are going, now's the moment. Throw your hat in the ring and get involved and do something that's going to change the future for your kid. I mean, that's how things change, right? Someone who's directly invested. And if you have kids in a school system, you're invested, right, in the outcome. So I'm going to push that into somebody else's corner. I'm not doing it.
So Lisa, what effect should an author's intentionality versus the reader's interpretation have when discussing book bans?
Nothing. If we're not going to ban the book, his intent doesn't matter, whether it's for good or for harm, whether they intended good and did harm, or whether they intended harm, and you can't ban the book. Now, maybe that's part of the conversation. And I will say this because since I write romance, there's been a lot of little political things going on in romance. One of which deals with people who aren't from the same culture or ethnicity or have the same health issue or whatever, writing characters that have issues, race, ethnicity, health issues outside of who they are. And often authors take this on and do a bad job, right? And then they're like, well, I meant well. And so there's that conversation of, well, but did you really do your research? Or did you even evaluate if maybe you shouldn't have taken on that topic and you shouldn't have written it, right? I will never tell an author not to write a book you say you want to write, but I will say you have to evaluate your goal in writing this book. Is it to say, hey, look how great I am? I'm going to put this character in my book that's Black, and I don't know, I've never talked to a Black person more than 10 minutes in my life, right? You like, think about it. But once you do it, the book is out there, and people's response to the book is people's response to the book. And as much as your intention can be a part of the conversation, I don't think it can be used to decide whether or not the book should be banned. Intentionality is great, but those of us who do the equity work or the inclusivity work know that there's intention and then there's impact. And we can't ignore the impact because somebody had a good intention. We just can't.
Gregory.
Right. I'm what Lisa said. Really, I seriously, I've said this before. I've said this on panels. I've sat on with Tonya. I think anybody should be allowed to write any book they want to write, to create any characters they want to create. We're authors, and if I can only write about old white gay men, I'm really limited in my choices and in my output and in my goals. Part of the joy of writing, I think, is research and getting to know other worlds and other people and other places. I would also say the same thing, like, you know, if you're going to write a Black character, absolutely, like, do your research, get feedback from what you've written from people of color to make sure you got it right and you got it as good as you could possibly get it. But I think the same thing can be said if you're writing about Chicago. If you've never been to Chicago, you can't write about Chicago or LA or San Francisco or Des Moines or Cleveland or anywhere, right? You have to go to those places. You have to do your research. You have to know which streets intersect. Do you know? I mean, you have to know what the weather's like. You have to do the research. And I think so. And I think places are like characters in books anyway. But it's the same. So if you're going to write somebody who's outside of your experience, whatever that is, do your research, right? As far as intention and response, I think the best thing we have is response, right? Do the best you can, write the best book you can. The audience is going to let you know whether it worked or not in the end, either through reviews or comments, being banned, or praised, or the book simply dying on the vine because people don't want to read it because it's so terrible, right? I mean, there are all kinds of choices with that. So,
Heather,
yeah, I was at the Saints and Sinners Writers Conference in the spring, and many of the panelists and faculty members, their books have been banned all over the country because they're all queer, gay, lesbian, right? And transgender. A lot of transgender stuff was banned before all this other stuff caught up. And what started to happen is it became a thing throughout the whole weekend where people would say, and this book has been banned here or there. The audience would applaud because that means you're doing the work, right? If you're writing a book that's getting banned, then you're doing the work. But you have to be true to the character and true to the identity. I think that should be the intention, in my opinion.
Heather?
No, I mean, I completely agree. The same thing kind of goes. I mean, I'm in the entertainment industry, so I work with scripts and productions and video, and it's the same thing. I mean, you would never dare. Well, some people dare. Some people
Right.
dare. But you wouldn't want to write a script that is so detached. You wouldn't want to tell a story that is so detached from the actual truth of somebody or something or some place, or that just, I mean, I don't know. It definitely goes back to the research. It definitely goes back to, and I always too, because there's been a few scripts that have come across my table and they're asking for feedback. And one example is a white man who is writing a kung fu story and all this kind of stuff. And so we have the discussion. Hey, what qualifies you to write this type of a story? Not that I'm pushing back, but it's just an honest question because as someone of Asian descent who actually studied martial arts and all this kind of stuff, what qualifies you? And so we had the discussion, and then then we talked about his characters a little bit more and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, at the end of it, I was like, okay. And then he did ask, and he was just like, can you just review, much like we already talked about, can you just review, give me your opinion, am I off base, am I right? Same thing with like women, with men who write things about women. there's been times where I've been handed a script and I was like, a woman would never say this ever. And he would be like, really? What? Okay. What would they say? And then there we go. We open up the topic and then we talk about it. But it's just being able to, you can write what it is that you want to write and have the intention, but have your check and balances too.
Yeah, I'm currently listening to the Metropolitan Affair by, I believe it's McManus, and so it's written by a woman, and the men all sound like women to me.
Mm.
Right? I think it goes other right. All these these roads all go both ways, right?
Yes.
It's like a tough detective would never sound like that. He just wouldn't if he's a tough detective, right? Yeah.
That's
Even
fair.
if he's in love with her, he wouldn't talk like that.
Right.
You know,
Or you'd have a response to talking like that. There would be.
right? He'd have a reason for it. Absolutely, absolutely. There'd be
This
motivation.
doesn't
in the
sound like
brain.
me, but it's how I'm feeling at the moment.
I can't believe I'm feeling this way. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
So we do want to get to today's banned book. Published in 2007, 19 minutes, follows the unfolding of a high school shooting, including the events leading up to the incident and the aftermath. It was Jodi Picoult's first book to debut at #1 on the New York Best Time Seller list. Lisa, how did you first learn about this book?
This book has been on my radar for a while, in part because I really like Jodi Picoult's books. I don't always read them when they first come out because she deals with some really heavy issues. But what she does well, I think, is put the issues out there through the characters and leaving it up to the reader to decide whether what's going on is good or bad. Like, she doesn't give you one way or the other. It's like, here's the characters, here's their flaws, figure it out. And when I first took over my classroom, there were books that had been left out in the pod in the library, and part of them were small collections of books that were like 2 or 3 copies that they had been using for book club. And this was one of the books. And I read the back and thought, oh, this would make a really good book circle discussion where the kids in the class usually have 25 to 30, 4 or 5 kids pick the same book, but every group is reading a different book, but they're doing the same type of analysis with the book, and then they share out. And so I thought, I got to get more copies. So half price book sale or something, I bought a lot more copies, and then never really used it for a book. Like, nobody really picked it, and I didn't push. So I never really read the book myself because I was going to do it as part of the book club. But then end of last year, earlier this year, when they started banning this book all over the place, again, I thought, I never did read that book. I need to read that book because, having taught in a high school and having gone through active shooter drills every year at the beginning of the school year, I thought, I need to read this book. And I just never did. So when it was on your list, I'm like, I got to be on the panel for this book. I need to read this book. I'm finally going to read this book. And so it was a chance for me to read something I'd been intending to read and hadn't gotten to.
Yeah, you were pretty quick to choose this one too. Heather, how did you first hear about it?
Well, from you, because you proposed it, a part of our list. And so I read the synopsis of it and all that kind of stuff. And I have nephews that are getting ready to go into high school, and So She Slays gets to partner and talk and do a lot of youth outreach and all that kind of stuff. So I figured, and I also was in school during the time of active shooter drills and like that kind of stuff. So to me, I've always found it very interesting, and kind of like Lisa, you said that they do, the writer Jodi does a really good job at kind of just presenting these characters and like and what they're going through. I've always kind of felt that with shooters and like people that are going through this, as far as like understanding, again, not agreeing or anything like that, but it's like understanding trains of thought and feeling and all of this kind of stuff, and not condoning in any which way, but at least understanding where the thought process was. And so
Why it
that's
happened,
something,
right?
yeah, like
Mhm.
that is something I really enjoyed when reading this book. And I'm really glad I chose it.
Gregory, how did you first hear about it? And
Um,
what
I'm
and
a,
what
I'm a
compelled you
re-
to choose it for this
yeah,
series?
I'm a Jodi Picoult fan in general because I like that she handles heavy topics and current topics. To be honest, though, I mean, this book's been out for about a dozen years now, right? So maybe a few more than that. I actually didn't read it because of the violence. I do tend to avoid violent content just in general. I mean, I think it's fine, right? The people write it. It's the journey we're on. Lord knows there's a lot of violence in the world. Um, I don't like violent media just in general. I don't like where it usually takes my brain. And so I didn't read it when it came out. And then when it came up on your list, I was sort of interested, but I still didn't exactly commit to it. But I did. I love Tonya. I'm a huge fan of Tonya Todd, and I appreciate all she does in our community. She's an amazing literary citizen. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to let you put me wherever you need me. So that was so, and then this is where I ended up. And I'm glad I got. I mean, I had a reason then to read the book, and I worked my way through the violence because it is about a school shooting, and so it is incredibly emotionally violent, even more than the physical gun firing. I think it's an emotionally violent book
Yeah.
on a lot of levels, and I liked that I felt empathy throughout the book for characters that you might not feel empathy for if you just read a news story about a real event. So she's good at what she did. Jodi Picoult is good at what she does. On so many levels. So anyway, so that's why I got here because of you, of course, and I'm happy to be here for the
Well,
journey.
it's no secret how much I love you, but I do find it interesting that this is 2 years in a row that you read a book that you would not ordinarily read because of the series. And I didn't do it to you on purpose. Like you read
Right,
a graphic novel last year, which not your thing.
right,
And
right,
now you've read a book about violence. So
right.
my apologies and
Right.
thank
Well,
you.
and gender. Right. And last year, and I was on the panel for Genderqueer, which was on my radar as well. It's the most banned book right now in the
Mhm.
country. It's been the most banned book for a number of years. And it's about the LGBTQ community. And so it's a really important piece of literature, really, really, really important piece of literature. And yeah, but I'm not a comic book fan, and it's a graphic novel. And so it's those things are hard. They're hard for me, for my brain to, but whatever. I like being challenged and taking the journey. And you asked the question earlier about reading books that you don't find right in your own bubble or whatever. And
Mhm.
so these books have been kind of on the edge of that. The topics are interesting to me, but they're outside of the scope of what I would normally read, you know. I also read about 70, 80 books a year. So I consume a lot of content. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I don't regret asking you to do these because I feel that you've added quite a bit to the conversations, but I am sorry for any discomfort.
No, I mean, I'm a big boy. I can handle it really in the end, you know.
So now that you've read the book, what do you think made it polarizing to the point of being banned? And we'll start with Gregory here.
When I was reading, actually, on some level, I couldn't figure out why it was banned. I mean, I understand school shooting. That's what I thought of school shooting and bullying. That's what I thought was going to be. But then, of course, I did a little more research, and it isn't. That isn't why it's been banned.
Mm,
It's been banned because of the one-page sex scene. A graphic. It is slightly graphic, but it isn't. It's very true to the characters. It isn't,
right.
and it
And it's
isn't.
not the focal point of the story at all.
No, and several of my novels have much more graphic sex in them, so it didn't feel that graphic at all to me. And then I was shocked. I'm like, you'd think it would be banned because of like the bullying thing, or maybe being seen as a roadmap of what someone who's bullied could, a way they could get even, or, I expected some whole other reason. And I did not do any research. I took a Tonya Todd moment and I didn't do any research or learn anything about the book until after I read it. So yeah, so I was shocked. One parent said something about the sex scene and that started the
Right.
banning of this book.
And
One
so
parent.
frequently it's one parent or one person making these choices for an
Yeah.
entire community.
Yeah.
Heather, when you read it, what were you thinking made it something that would be on the radar for someone to ban it?
It's certainly not the sex. I mean, that was so minor. I was like, I kind of forgot that even existed amongst the whole like scheme of the story. Um, I really thought it was just like gun violence and like a roadmap or anything like that. And I mean, even that's like no reason for it to be banned by any means, but that's honestly what I thought. It was just like gun violence and just that nature.
What were your thoughts, Lisa?
Well, I was familiar with why it was banned.
Okay.
Yeah, I followed Jodi Picoult on social media, and probably full disclosure, she's a Princeton alum. I'm a Princeton alum, so I don't want anybody to say I've got some bias here. But she talks about the fact that that first set of bannings was about one parent who didn't mention violence, but her primary thing was sexual situations. And I thought, right, because there's a lot of hint that the teenagers in the book are sexually active, right? So early on, I thought, well, is it because they're hinting at this? And, there's don't know how many spoilers we want to get, but, there's a lack of using a condom scare and, those kinds of things. I didn't realize there was going to be the one-page sex scene, which of course I thought I write on the page sex as a romance author. Like I write sensual romance. So I'm like, that was it? Like, right? Like,
Right.
really? And some violence. But one of the things I will say is it's another example of people making assumptions who don't do the full reading, right? So one parent says this is a bad book. She says it about something that's really minor in the book. The other people don't read the book. They hear it's a book about school shooting and they're like, oh yeah, we can't let that be in the school. And they're not following the conversation. Half of them don't really know what the initial complaint was about. And most of the board members who agreed with her never read the book. And that's part of the danger of how these things happen in America. You don't have to read the book. You just have to complain about it.
Right. That first banning too, the whole committee wasn't even there.
Mm-mm.
Half the committee was not at the meeting. So it was sort of rammed through.
Yeah.
Which may have been intentional.
Maybe it may have
True.
been. And I also thought maybe that, I mean, the boyfriend was abusive. And so I thought that might have been a reason to ban the book, right? Because
But not in the
that's hard.
slightest.
Not in the slightest, because he's so harsh, right? But boys get away with whatever they want, right? So, well, in the end, he didn't. But
Yeah.
I don't think we have to worry about spoilers, right? We're here to actually talk about the book. So,
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
I know I am anti-spoiler in general, but I do, warn people before they listen to this. There will be spoilers in this conversation about this particular
So
book.
read the book first. So if you haven't read it, stop now. Go read the book. Come back. Okay.
Right.
And so, Gregory, I want to tell you that you were partially right. It just maybe hadn't happened yet, because a committee in Beaufort County, South Carolina, has banned this book earlier this year because they decided that, one deciding member stated that she thought there were too many things in the book that could plant seeds, the wrong seeds in a child that could really be struggling with things at home and in school. But separately, in an article titled "What Florida Doesn't Want You to Know About Its Book Bans, a response to the excessive banning of her books," Jodi Picoult said, "My books were removed because they were, according to the sole parent who made the challenge, adult romance that should not be on the bookshelves." And she also said it's worth noting that she doesn't write adult romance. The majority of the books were targeted don't even have a kiss in them. What they do have, however, are issues like racism, abortion rights, gun control, gay rights, and other topics that encourage kids to think for themselves.
Yeah.
And she said that the book of hers that has been banned most frequently in the last 6 months, and this was earlier this year, I believe that she wrote this article, is 19 Minutes, which is about a school shooting and the effects of bullying. However, the reason cited for its inappropriateness for kids is not the mention of violence, but rather a single page that depicts a date rape using anatomically correct words for the human body. What does it say about our world when keeping children safe means a book about school shootings is banned because it has a word for genitalia in it, but we don't regulate the guns that cause those real life shootings? Lisa,
Spot on.
what's on
Spot
this?
on. I'm like, As a romance writer and as someone who reads a vast amount of romance, both for pleasure and to study, whether it's closed door, I will say, because I don't like the term clean, because I don't find sex dirty, whether it's books without intimacy on the page to very explicit, there ain't nothing about Jodi Picoult's books that's a romance, people. Sorry. Adult or otherwise. These are not romance books. They're also not books that focus on sex. That was about an emotionally traumatic situation that we needed on the page to understand those characters. That was the point of it. 1 in 3 college females have been subjected to date rape. The numbers are pretty close for high school females. So for us not to allow our children to know this happens, to me is irresponsible because it's a risk factor. And it actually came up in my classroom at one time, and a guy kind of joked it off, a girl talking about being afraid to walk to her car when she had to go down a dark stairwell by herself. And the guy started laughing about it. And I said, whoa, time. I stopped class and we had to have this conversation to let him understand that as a male, it is your responsibility to take this seriously, because if you are ever with a girl, a woman, whether she's your girlfriend, your friend, or just somebody that you happen to be hanging out at night, you need to walk her to her car because it's real. The threat is real. The fear is real. But the conversation came up based off of something that happened in the story we read. It wasn't date rape, but it made the girl think about a time when she was afraid and why. So imagine the kind of beneficial education conversations some teacher could have had in a classroom if this book had been allowed to be on that school shelf, or they'd been allowed to discuss it in the classroom. These are real subjects. These are real things our children, our young adults, people are facing, adult women face, quite honestly, right? So why would you ban a book when it's real stuff? Like, you just don't, people don't want to face reality in the United States. And it's unfortunate because that's what this is about. Let's hide the reality, because I'm going to stop. I'm getting on my soapbox. I'm sorry.
That's why you're here. Heather, what are your thoughts on this?
I mean, I'm sorry, what was your question? I was definitely into like Lisa's.
Well, I had just
Yes,
explained
absolutely.
exactly why the books were banned, and I'm asking what are your thoughts on this now that we hear the actual reasons?
I mean, I've kind of already said it in the fact where it's like, obviously, I did not think that that would be the main cause for that one-page sex scene or anything like that. I read a few romance novels. My mom's a big connoisseur of romance novels, so we share a Kindle. So once in a while, something pops up, and I was like, that looks interesting. Uh, so I'll read along and all that kind of stuff, but it's not at all anything to be ashamed of. And the fact is like, it's like we said, it's somebody wants to control, people's, their kids ways of thoughts and ways of thinkings. I mean, I don't think I can say any other way than like Lisa said it. It's when you open the door to these types of conversations, stuff like that happens. And that was just, a scene or a moment in a book, right? And it actually led to the enlightening of men probably in that class who probably didn't think anything of it. They learned a valuable lesson that has probably stuck with them. And that was just out of like a page or two out of a book, So the ripple effect is huge. And I just don't understand why people just want to censor so much and not have these types of discussions and these types of thoughts. Because the thing is like, even if it was a parent, if it was a mom or whatever, or even a dad of whatnot, it's not just this sex scene. There's so much to be learned in all of these books in general. And it's not just about sex, and it's not just about violence, but it's what you make it, right? It's what you're trying to teach someone. So if you see violence in this, and you're like, oh, I don't want to have, any more violence. Well, how much other violent stuff are they consuming? Instead of just leaning into that, how about we have a conversation about it? How about we have a conversation about bullying? How about we have a conversation about consent? How about we, like, again, soapbox, but it's like, this is just a conversation starter. And a lot of times I get it. It's like people don't have the answers. And what I've learned to a lot of times when it comes to parents and their kids is, you know, they don't necessarily have the answer, quote unquote, like what kids expect their parents to have, a yes or no, black or white answer. And then the parents don't know how to articulate the gray areas that life presents.
Anything to add to that, Gregory?
No, I'm right with it. I think this is all about the conversation and the fear of having a conversation. If we were having a more honest, healthy conversation with young people about sex, which was tried for a while and now is being pushed back against, like so many other things, it'd be different. And I think the idea of seeing yourself on the page comes up here because that's exactly what we're talking about on some level, right? A young woman reading the scene and seeing what is a date rape and having a moment of either something to look out for or a realization of me too. Right? The bullying, all the characters who are bullied and how they're bullied, and all the characters who are bullies and how they bully. Right? That's just an opportunity for kids to see themselves on the page and to have a conversation or start a conversation about that portrayal potentially. So yeah,
Well, Picoult also stated that in the years since she wrote 19 Minutes, she's received thousands of emails from bullied kids. And she said some who said the book was the reason they decided not to bring a gun to school, some who said the book was the reason they didn't attempt suicide. Reading my novel didn't harm them. In fact, it made them realize they were not alone in their thoughts and feelings. The most common sentence in letters I receive from readers is, I never really thought about this issue before. This is what books do. Heather, what was your emotional response to this book?
Empathy, compassion, understanding. I'm not going to lie, this book, because I normally don't like to read super heavy novels or books and stories. I like to do it for fun. I like my easy reads. I like to like disappear into a different land kind of a thing. But this one, gosh, it definitely, like, there were instances that it made me have to put down the book for a second and just kind of think about people and my own experiences and all that kind of stuff. And just how sad, like, I felt for the parents so bad. Gosh, I mean, I can't even. My sister, it has a kid who's going into high school, and we do worry about him to some degree, not in this state, not in this, type of circumstance, but any kid that's going to go to a high school, a different, different people that he's known, you're being put into these different environments, and it's worrying as a parent. Like, I talked to her about it. So it's like, I really, really felt for the parents' journey. I mean, I felt for all the characters' journeys. And that's why it's like, I think she just did a fantastic job of really putting me in the mindset and understanding the thought processes behind every decision, behind what they were feeling and why they were feeling it, without even actually like just telling me. It was more of an experience.
How about you, Gregory? What was your emotional reader response?
well, I found myself backing out at times and looking at the writing. As a writer, we do that, right? The construction is of character construction in this novel is really rather remarkable. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I felt great empathy for the shooter, which I think is a remarkable thing to do, to take someone who commits a horrific act, and in the process of exploring their journey, finding the empathy, right? And I mean, I was a bullied kid and called queer and faggot and all kinds of horrible things when I was young, before I even understood what any of those words meant, just that they were derogatory, right? Not even connected to sexuality. It was pre-pubescent even, and not fitting in and being on the outside. And I could see the journey of this bullied character, and they made very different choices than I have in my life, but still being able to see that. And I actually had a moment, and I don't know exactly where in the book, but about 2/3 of the way through maybe, where the lawyer's working with the shooter, and there's this brief twinkle that he might get him off. And and that bothered me too, because like I started thinking, what kind of message would that send if a kid committed such a horrific act and got off him? And we see people around us in the media getting off all the time for horrific acts, right? So it is a conversation. It is part of the journey, and the fact that the kid doesn't get off in the end. It made me feel a little better about that part of the journey. But I found myself also caring for some of the bullies. I found myself really caring for the parents, and the idea of how parallel their lives were for different reasons. And so Jodi did a very nice, like I know her, she did a very nice job creating that parallel construction of those two moms right from the beginning. And while there are some flaws in the storytelling, I think overall I liked the way it unfolded, and so I felt a lot of empathy. And in the end, I did feel a bit of terror when the detective finds the shooter in the locker room in that early part of the book, and that moment I was terror filled. Right, it was terrifying on so many different levels. Um, but I was relieved that we didn't get all the shooting details until the end of the novel,
Mhm.
because by then I already knew all these characters so well that I was in and had sort of been a little bit desensitized actually to the violence, because they had been talking around it for hundreds of pages. So then when we actually got to the scenes um, and the description of those scenes, I was a little better emotionally equipped to kind of take in the violence. So I appreciated that, and I know that that's a construction choice, right? That was an author, the way she constructed the novel. That was the way she chose to do that. Right? It has a bit of that courtroom dynamic, big reveal at the end, of course, but still, right? So I was ready.
In my opinion. Like, it was pretty obvious early.
Yeah, so I took this journey, you know what I mean? And it was truly a roller coaster of emotions, you know. And I actually had an opportunity because I listened to 2/3 of this novel, the last 2/3 of the novel, while I was driving in a 12-hour road trip. So I actually got to listen to a big chunk of the novel nonstop, which I think in storytelling also makes a big difference,
Yeah.
because you don't take a break and get involved in your life and make dinner and then go back into it, right? So you get the whole thing, and there were some levels of that were exhausting, too emotionally. But anyway,
How about you, Lisa? What was your emotional reaction?
I think like Gregory, there were times where I got into the writing, and I actually did it early on because initially, because I've been reading stories that progress linearly for a while and have limited primary characters. This show me somebody. Now we're going to go show me somebody else. Now you're going to go show me somebody else. Now you're going to. I had a hard time following that. I had to like get myself mentally prepared to stay in the story, because every time she jumped to a different character, I was like, okay, I need a break, right? Because now we're going someplace else. But once I got immersed in those characters, I just like the subtlety with which there are so many layers of emotion and so many layers of complicated actions in this, because early on I cringed when, and it's only like second chapter, maybe second chapter, there's a scene where Josie hasn't eaten all day and she's got a plate of French fries and she's really looking forward to having those French fries. And then her boyfriend says something snide to her about, are you going to eat those fries or something, right? And makes her feel bad about the fries. So she doesn't want them. So he grabs a handful and gives the rest to his buddy. And I'm sitting there thinking, this is not a good relationship. So early on, I'm already seeing the layers and the subtlety here. And I'm thinking, right? And she kept having all these issues. So I'm like, okay, she's holding something back. I didn't expect what she was holding back to be what she was holding back, but I knew there was some dynamic there that was going on. And so once she did that to me, when she did it to me again, I would notice. So like the moments where the parents of the shooter, where the father was having a really hard time dealing with being the father of a man whose son had killed all these other people, because it's something I often thought about. When you see school shootings and they interview the parent and they're trying to hold it together, and I'm thinking, oh my God, get that microphone out of that woman's face, or that, like, how they're trying to do, like, as a parent, I'm thinking, how do you deal with your fact that your kid is the one who just killed a whole bunch of other children? And in this book, she gives you a chance to get behind that. And there's something, it's great intellectual to experience, but there's something off-settling about it emotionally to actually have a front row seat to that, because we've all watched about the aftermath of school shootings. Like, United States, that's what we do. We have these school shootings all the freaking time, and politicians don't seem to care, right? But we sat in front of the TV listening to these interviews of the kids who survived, or the parents who survived, and she gave us a look behind those emotions that we often can't get in those news snippets. And it was just a little, like, I think, like Heather said, there were times where I kind of had to put the book down, right? And be like, woo, that's kind of heavy, right? Which is why I don't always pick up a Jodi Picoult book, but I love what I do. But yeah, it's subtle, but it's beautifully done. I think it's beautifully done.
So we are nearing the end of our conversation. Gregory, what do you see as the reasons people should read 19 minutes?
I do. I think it's about that idea of seeing behind the scenes, the idea of seeing what's going on with the characters. It isn't about the news moment, right? It is about the different thoughts and the different ideas of this cast of characters. And it is a very big cast of characters. We get into some of the psychology of school shooting, but really this is about individuals, and this moment in time for them, and where they go. And because we're seeing far more school shootings than we were when this book came out, I don't think every school shooting is exactly motivated in the same way, of course. But I think the idea of seeing the world through a different lens, potentially through the lens of all these different characters, and seeing how the facts play differently for different characters, and the power of that. I think that's one of the moments of this book that's worthwhile. That construction of character and getting to see how different people review and react to a set of events.
How about you, Heather? What are the lessons that can be learned or conversations that can be started from reading this book?
I think this is a great conversation starter on so many prevalent issues in today's culture, in today's youth. I think this is a way to open doors to probably having some of the toughest conversations, whether it's, date rape, whether it is bullying, whether it is, thoughts of suicide, not fitting in, all of that kind of stuff. Because I think we run into stuff like this as adults, but the thing is some of us hopefully have learned some coping mechanisms. And so that's why I really worry about the youth, and why I almost feel like this could be a book that's the most beneficial in that area, because it gives them an excuse to talk about the things that maybe they're already thinking about.
Lisa.
I like, I have the book club edition of the book, and in the back there's an interview with Jodi Picoult, and she talks about how when she came up with this concept and first started doing the research and studying these issues more in depth, how it occurred to her that even adults are still in some of these bullying situations. Like, we don't call it bullying, but adults are having these dysfunctional interactions on this level. And I think Heather's right that we've learned coping mechanisms and we deal with it different. So for me, 19 minutes is a chance to go read a book that's about a school shooting and possibly the trial. And as a lawyer, I love books about trials. So I love that aspect. But I did cringe when I thought he was going to get involved. But I thought it was a great way to try to get involved. But relationships, and we talk about books a lot, and characters and characterization. It's about people being able to relate to those characters and get something out of those characters. And I think people need to read this book because it's not just about high school students. It's not just about the school shooting. It's about how human we are, even when we think we're at our best moments, how you can't be the perfect mom and the perfect professional, no matter what you do to raise your kids. Sometimes they're going to do something on their own, right? It's all about that human nature. And I love the discussion of all the humanality we can find in this book, but it also gives us a background to think about school shootings. Like she talked about bullying and school shootings, and we need to not shy away from school shootings. And I love that she talked about the PTSD from battered woman syndrome in this book, and that they try to apply it to this situation, because often we hear mental health, it's not the guns, it's mental health. It's not the guns, it's mental health. But if you read this book and really get behind it, there were a whole lot of things that happened to this kid, to the people around him, to Josie, that we wouldn't traditionally call mental health. We can't just go mental health, mental, there's no, action without reaction.
Mm-hmm.
And this gives us a chance to look at what are the levels that build up to this? How do we see them? What can we do about them? And quit hiding behind mental health as the reason for school shootings when there's a whole lot more involved in that.
Well, that is an excellent place to end this. Lisa, tell everyone where people can find you and support your work.
My website is lisarayne.com. On there, you'll find my books. And I did take a little curve and do something different by giving the romance industry its first Black Highlander in Never Cross a Highlander, set in the 1600s. I also have recently started the Scribal Business Coaching Program for authors, which is turning authors into savvy entrepreneurs. So it's about teaching authors how to do the business side so that they can have a sustainable long-term career. And you can find that group on Facebook. Just look for facebook.com/groups/Scribal, SCRIBAL.
Gregory.
My website, GregoryKompes.com, or even Kompes.com. They both go there, KOMPES. My books are there. My latest book, it'll be backward, right? My latest book, Obsequious, just came out, which is part of the Broadway series, although it stands alone, of course. And there's information there about the other things I do, including the writer workshop.
And the audiobook just came out too, right?
Yeah, the audiobook just came out a few weeks ago. Yeah. And people love the narrator. So I'm very pleased with how it turned out.
Do you want to plug your appearance at AWP?
Well, that's not till February. Yeah, I'll be at, I don't even know I don't know the name. I don't know the
February
name of
7th.
February 7th. And I'm on a panel with Tonya, Todd, and a few other writers talking about queer identity within books. Looking forward to that very much.
I'll be in excellent company there.
It's my first time going to AWP, so I'm very excited.
Oh, very cool. I'm glad to bring you. Heather, where can people find you and support your work?
You can find me on all the socials at So She Slays, and then you can also find us at SoSheSlays.com. You can find us on all the podcast platforms that stream for the So She Slays podcast, and our newly edition, the So She Slays presents The Hangover. So
excellent. Thank you all for your amazing input today. This was a wonderful conversation. If you enjoyed this conversation, you liked what you heard, please like, comment, share. Thank you for listening. And more importantly, thank you for reading.